You believe younger women avoid you because of your age. No, they avoid you because you keep apologizing for it. She didn't reject your years, she rejected your shame. Listen carefully. There's a specific behavior older men display around younger women that triggers an almost visceral repulsion in her. It's not what you think, it's not your grey hair, not the lines around your eyes, not even the age gap itself. It's something far more unsettling. Something that happens in the first 30 seconds of interaction, a micro behavior so subtle you don't even realize you're doing it, but she feels it immediately. And once she feels it, the attraction dies before it ever had a chance to breathe. There's a difference between being older and being apologetic about it. One commands respect, the other broadcasts weakness. Most men past 40 make a fatal mistake when they encounter a woman in her 20s or 30s. They don't just acknowledge the age gap, they prostrate themselves before it. They treat their experience like a liability, their grey hair like a mark of shame, their years like something requiring forgiveness. And the woman feels it immediately, not consciously. She doesn't think to herself, this man is ashamed of his age. But her body knows. Her instincts register the energy, the subtle self-deprecation, the quiet desperation underneath every joke about being old, the way he distances himself from his own timeline as if youth is the only currency that matters. This matters because attraction isn't built on equality, it's built on polarity. And polarity requires one person to occupy their ground fully while the other responds to that occupation. When you apologize for being older, you collapse the entire structure. You remove the frame. You hand her the responsibility of validating your existence, and no woman, regardless of age, wants that burden. Nietzsche wrote about resentment, the poisonous internal state that emerges when someone cannot affirm their own existence and instead defines themselves through negation, through what they are not, through apologies for what they are. When you joke about being old, you are engaging in resentment. When you point out that she's so much younger, you are engaging in resentment. When you frame your experience as outdated rather than earned, you are engaging in resentment. And she doesn't just notice, she loses interest entirely. The psychology here is ancient. Ethologists who study primate behavior have documented something called status signaling for decades. In hierarchical species, individuals who occupy higher positions demonstrate what researchers call relaxed dominance. They don't defend their position, they inhabit it. There's no performance, no justification, no explanation. Lower status individuals, by contrast, engage in what's termed appeasement behavior. Constant small gestures designed to communicate non-threat, to apologize for occupying space. Now apply this to human mating psychology. Women are biologically wired to detect status markers, not wealth, not height, not even age, but the internal experience of status. The felt sense that someone occupies their position without apology, that they have integrated their own existence so fully that they don't need external validation to justify it. When an older man apologizes for being older, every biological detector in her system registers it as low status, as appeasement behavior, as someone who has not integrated their own timeline and is therefore unreliable as a partner. Evolutionary psychologist David Buss found that women across cultures consistently prefer men who display social dominance and confidence. But here's what most people misunderstand about those terms. Confidence isn't bravado, it's not loud, it's not performance. Confidence is the absence of apology. It's walking into a room and not explaining why you're there. It's being 53 years old and not making jokes about being old to ease her discomfort with the age gap. Because you're not uncomfortable, you've lived. You've accumulated scars and wisdom and grey hair, and you treat those things as assets, not liabilities. The moment you apologize for your age, you activate her disgust response, not because she's cruel, because you violated a fundamental principle of attraction, congruence. Picture this. A 47-year-old man sits across from a 29-year-old woman at a wine bar. The conversation has been smooth. She's laughing, leaning in, asking questions. Then he says it. I'm probably too old for you. Or, I know I'm not as young as I used to be. Or, you probably prefer guys your own age. And just like that, the energy collapses. She smiles. Politely. But something behind her eyes has shifted. The attraction that was building, that was becoming real, evaporates. Not because she suddenly realized he's older. She knew that when she agreed to meet him, but because he just told her he doesn't believe in his own value. He handed her a reason to reject him, and she'll take it. This is the invisible mistake that destroys more connections than any other single factor. Not the age gap itself, but the apology for the age gap. the self-negation, the inability to occupy your own frame without collapsing under the imagined judgment of someone younger. Let's go deeper. There's a particular kind of humor older men use around younger women. Self-deprecating humor about age. Back in my day, I'm practically ancient. My knees don't work like they used to. They think it's charming, relatable, a way to acknowledge the elephant in the room and diffuse tension. But what it actually does is train her to see you through the lens of decline. You are teaching her to view you as someone in decay, as someone whose best years are behind them, and attraction does not flow toward decay, it flows toward vitality. Not youthful vitality necessarily, but the vitality of someone who is still growing, still becoming, still interested in the world and their place in it. The 50-year-old man who talks about his age like it's a disease is signaling that he has stopped becoming, that he views his timeline as a countdown rather than an accumulation, that he is, in the deepest sense, finished. And she can feel it. Psychologists call this narrative identity, the story you tell yourself about who you are and where you're going. Research by Dan McAdams shows that people who frame their life story as one of growth, agency and meaning report higher life satisfaction and are perceived as more attractive by potential partners. When you joke about being old, you are narrating your identity as one of decline. You are telling her, without words, that your story is ending. And no woman wants to be a footnote in a story that's already over. Here's what most men don't understand about frame. Frame isn't something you hold, it's something you are. When you occupy your frame fully, you don't need to defend it. You don't need to explain it. You don't need to apologize for it. It's simply the reality you inhabit, and others either enter that reality or they don't. But the moment you apologize for your age, you exit your frame, you step into hers. You hand her the power to define the interaction, and you ask her, implicitly, to give you permission to be older, to reassure you that it's okay, that she doesn't mind. And the instant you do that, the polarity collapses, because she's not looking for someone who needs her permission to exist. She's looking for someone who exists so fully that his reality becomes the one she wants to inhabit. Think about the men younger women actually choose when they date older. They're not apologetic. They're not self-deprecating. They don't bring up their age unless she does, and even then, they treat it as an irrelevant detail. They talk about their work, their interests, their projects, their plans. They ask her questions. They create experiences. They occupy their timeline as if it's exactly where they're supposed to be. Because it is. The age gap isn't the obstacle. Your shame about the age gap is. When a younger woman interacts with an older man, she's running a series of unconscious tests. She's not testing whether he's old, she's testing whether he's finished. There's a difference. Old means you've lived. You've accumulated experience. You've made mistakes and learned from them. You've developed perspective. You've refined your taste. You've become more of yourself rather than less. Finished means you've given up. You've stopped growing. You've resigned yourself to decline. You've accepted the narrative that your best years are behind you. Women are attracted to the first, repulsed by the second. And the way she determines which one you are is through how you talk about your own existence. Do you speak about your past with pride or apology? Do you reference your experience as an asset or a liability? Do you treat your age as something that adds depth to your presence or something that needs explaining away? She's watching. And every self-deprecating comment is a data point that tells her you belong to the second category. Robert Greene wrote about the concept of the natural in the art of seduction. The natural is someone who seems completely comfortable in their own skin, who hasn't lost the vitality of youth but has transmuted it into something deeper, something more integrated. The natural doesn't apologize for their age because they've never stopped becoming, and that's what she's searching for, not youth, aliveness. There's something else happening beneath the surface. When you apologize for being older, you're not just signaling low status, you're signaling mortality awareness. You're communicating, subtly, that you are closer to death than she is, that your body is declining, that your time is limited. And while this might seem like an honest acknowledgement of reality, it triggers something primal in her biology. Terror management theory, developed by psychologists Sheldon Solomon, Jeff Greenberg, and Tom Pichasinski, suggests that humans have an unconscious fear of death that influences nearly every aspect of behavior. When confronted with mortality reminders, people engage in various defense mechanisms to buffer against existential anxiety. One of those mechanisms is distancing from mortality cues. When you joke about being old, about your body breaking down, about being past your prime, you activate her mortality salience. You remind her, unconsciously, of death. And her biological response is to create distance, not because she's shallow, because she's human. The men who succeed with younger women don't deny their age. They simply don't frame it through the lens of mortality. They frame it through the lens of vitality. They talk about what they're building, not what they've lost. They reference their future, not just their past. They embody the energy of someone who has more to give, not someone who's running out of time. There's a scene that plays out in every interaction between an older man and a younger woman, a moment where the age gap becomes visible. Maybe she references a cultural touchstone he doesn't know. Maybe she mentions an artist who became famous after he stopped paying attention to pop culture. Maybe she makes a joke about something from her generation, and in that moment, he has a choice. He can apologize for not knowing, or he can occupy his timeline. The first response looks like this: "Yeah, I'm too old to know about that. That was after my time. You young people and your music." The second response looks like this: "I haven't heard of them. Tell me what makes them interesting." Or he simply acknowledges the gap without apologizing for it. Different generation. What else are you into? The difference is subtle but devastating. One collapses the frame. The other holds it. When you occupy your timeline, you're not pretending to be younger. You're not trying to keep up with her references. You're simply existing in your own era without apology, and you're curious about hers. You're demonstrating that your value doesn't come from being young. It comes from being you. Here's the trap most older men fall into. They try to relate to her by pretending they're younger than they are. They reference trends they don't actually care about. They use slang that sounds forced coming out of their mouth. They dress in styles designed for men 20 years younger. They think this makes them more relatable. But what it actually does is signal incongruence. Incongruence is one of the most unattractive qualities a person can display. It's the gap between who you are and who you're pretending to be. And women have finely tuned incongruence detectors. They can sense when something is off, when someone is performing rather than being. The irony is that the more you try to relate to her by mimicking youth, the more you highlight the age gap, because you're constantly drawing attention to the fact that you don't naturally belong in her cultural context. The man who succeeds doesn't try to enter her world, he invites her into his. He talks about the music he actually loves, even if it's from the 70s. He dresses in a way that reflects his actual taste, even if it's not trendy. He references his experiences, his knowledge, his perspective, not apologetically, but as offerings. And she responds not because he's relatable, but because he's real. Because authenticity is more attractive than any performance of youth could ever be. There's a way older men move around younger women that broadcasts everything. The slight hunch in the shoulders, the apologetic taking up of space, the hesitant movement, the over-politeness. It's as if they're trying to make themselves smaller, less threatening, less present. They think this makes them more acceptable, more approachable. But what it actually communicates is weakness. Physical presence is a language, and younger women are fluent in it. When you move through space with apology, you tell her that you don't believe you deserve to be there, that your age makes you less worthy of occupying the same room, the same conversation, the same possibility. Compare this to the older man who moves with unhurried confidence, who takes up space without apology, who touches her arm when making a point, not aggressively but naturally, who maintains strong eye contact without breaking away first, who sits back in his chair rather than leaning forward desperately. His body is telling a different story, a story that says, "I belong here, I have earned my place in this interaction. My age is not something that diminishes me, it's something that has made me more of who I am." And her body responds to that story, not intellectually, viscerally. The younger woman doesn't hate your age. She hates your apology for it. She doesn't reject you because you're older. She rejects you because you've rejected yourself first. Every joke about being old is a rejection of your own timeline. Every self-deprecating comment is a disavowal of your own experience. Every moment you spend trying to seem younger is a moment you spend communicating that who you actually are isn't enough. And if you don't believe you're enough, why should she? The path forward isn't about denying your age, it's about integrating it. It's about looking at the grey in your beard and seeing wisdom instead of decay. It's about referencing your past, not as the good old days, but as the foundation for everything you're building now. It's about treating your age as exactly what it is, accumulated time that has made you more capable, more grounded, more yourself. The younger women who are attracted to older men aren't looking for someone who pretends to be young. They're looking for someone who has become, someone who has lived enough to have stories worth telling, someone who has failed enough to have depth, someone who has suffered enough to have compassion, someone who has won enough to have confidence, someone who occupies their timeline not as a sentence but as a foundation. You don't need to be younger. You need to stop apologizing for not being younger. You need to stop collapsing your own frame. You need to stop handing her reasons to reject you. You need to occupy your age the way a king occupies a throne, not with arrogance, but with the quiet certainty that you belong there, because you've earned it, through every scar, every failure, every lesson, every year. The woman who rejects you for being older wasn't rejecting your age. She was rejecting your shame about it. And the moment you stop being ashamed, you'll discover something. The age gap was never the problem. You were.